They said she was the ghost of Blackthorn Manor, a duchess in name only, married 7 years to a man who never once looked at her. While England's elite whispered behind silk fans, Lyra Whitcomb endured a marriage colder than winter stone, bound to Duke Adrian Blackthorn, a war hero whose heart belonged to a phantom. But when that phantom returned from the grave, beautiful, deadly, and hungry for power, Lyra made a choice that shocked them all. She would not run. She would not hide. She would fight. And before the season ended, the woman they called invisible would become unforgettable. If you're ready to witness a duchess rise from silence to power, stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment which city you're watching from. The first mistake everyone made about Duchess Lyra Whitcomb was assuming she felt nothing. The second was believing she would break. She stood at the window of the east drawing room, watching rain hammer against the leaded glass, each droplet a tiny fist against the barriers between her and the world outside. Beyond the manicured gardens of Blackthorn Manor stretched the wild Yorkshire moors, endless, unforgiving, beautiful in their brutality. 7 years she'd lived here. 7 years since she'd walked down the aisle of St. George's Chapel in a dress that weighed less than the silence that followed. "Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess, has arrived for tea." Lyra didn't turn from the window. Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper, had been with Blackthorn Manor for 40 years. She knew every shadow in these halls, including the one Lyra had become. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton. I'll be down momentarily." "She's brought Lady Ashworth and the Viscountess Grayson." Of course she had. Adrian's mother never traveled alone when she could bring witnesses to her daughter-in-law's inadequacies. Lyra's reflection in the rain-streaked glass showed a woman of 28 who looked older in the eyes and younger in the face, pale skin, dark auburn hair pulled back with brutal efficiency, a dress of deep blue that was expensive, appropriate, and utterly forgettable. Perfect camouflage for a woman learning to survive by becoming invisible. She descended the grand staircase with practiced grace, each step measured, her spine straight as the portraits of Blackthorn ancestors that lined the walls. They stared down with painted eyes that held more warmth than her husband's living ones. The marble floor of the entrance hall gleamed like ice, cleaned daily by servants who moved through the manor like whispers, maintaining a household that hummed with empty efficiency. The drawing room doors stood open. Inside, the Dowager Duchess Eleanor Blackthorn presided over the tea service like a general commanding troops. At 63, she was still beautiful, silver hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes like polished steel. Beside her sat Lady Ashworth, whose 3 daughters had all married spectacularly, and Viscountess Grayson, known throughout London for her ability to destroy reputations with a single raised eyebrow. "Lyra, darling," Eleanor's voice could make endearments sound like accusations. "How lovely you look. Doesn't she look lovely, ladies?" "Quite lovely," Lady Ashworth murmured, her tone suggesting she'd forgotten Lyra's face the moment she looked away. Lyra took her seat, arranging her skirts with movements that betrayed none of the tension coiling in her spine. "You're too kind. I hope your journey from London wasn't too tiresome." "London is exhausting this season," Eleanor said, pouring tea with movements that managed to be both elegant and aggressive. "The Hartley Ball last week. 500 guests, can you imagine? The crush was unbearable. Of course, Adrian attended. Did he mention it?" "He did not." The silence that followed was pointed. Adrian Blackthorn, 7th Duke of Blackthorn, master of this estate and commander of Lyra's empty marriage, rarely mentioned anything. He existed in her life like weather, present, inevitable, beyond her control. "He danced 3 times with Lady Catherine Somerset," Viscountess Grayson offered, ostensibly to the room, but aimed like a knife at Lyra's composure. "She looked radiant in rose silk." "Catherine always was a beauty," Eleanor said. "Such a tragedy, her husband passing so young. A riding accident, they said, though there was talk." She stopped delicately, letting imagination fill the gaps. Lyra sipped her tea. It was excellent. Eleanor always brought her own blend, unable to trust that anything in this house could meet her standards. The wedge of lemon floated like a tiny boat in a storm. "Talk is cheap in London," Lyra said quietly. "Truth is more expensive." Lady Ashworth's cup rattled against her saucer. The Viscountess's mouth pursed. But Eleanor smiled. a sharp, calculating expression that reminded Lyra exactly where Adrian had learned to armor himself. "My dear, you've become quite philosophical in your solitude. Though I suppose one must find ways to pass the time when one's husband spends more nights at his club than at home." The words should have stung. Perhaps years ago they would have. But Lyra had developed calluses where other women had nerves. "Adrian's business keeps him occupied," she said. "The estate doesn't manage itself." "No, but it does manage to run perfectly well without a nursery full of heirs, doesn't it?" Eleanor set down her cup with a decisive click. 7 years, Lyra. 7 years and not even a whisper of a child. One begins to wonder if you're truly fulfilling your duties as a wife. There it was. The blade, finally unsheathed. Lyra met Eleanor's eyes across the tea service, across the canyon of expectation and disappointment that yawned between them. In another life, she might have defended herself. Explained that a child required a husband who actually touched his wife. That 7 years of sleeping in separate wings made conception rather difficult. But that was private shame, and she'd learned never to arm her enemies with the truth. "One can only fulfill the duties one is permitted to perform," Lyra said, her voice so controlled it could have frozen the tea. "I'm sure you understand." The meaning landed like a stone in still water. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She understood perfectly. Lyra was implying that the failure belonged to Adrian, not to her. A dangerous move in a society that always blamed the woman, but Eleanor was too intelligent not to recognize a draw when she saw one. "Ladies," Eleanor said briskly, "perhaps we should discuss the charity bazaar. Lyra, I trust you'll be contributing something to the auction?" They moved to safer topics. Lyra participated with the minimum required effort, offering the appropriate responses at the appropriate times, a performance she'd perfected through years of practice. She would donate an embroidered cushion. She would attend the opera next month. She would consider joining the Ladies' Literary Society, though everyone knew she wouldn't. When they finally departed in a rustle of silk and condescension, Lyra stood in the entrance hall and listened to their carriage wheels crunch down the gravel drive. Only when the sound faded completely did she allow her shoulders to drop, her mask to crack just slightly. "Vultures," Mrs. Pemberton said quietly, appearing from wherever housekeepers materialized from. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but vultures." "Vultures serve a purpose in nature, Mrs. Pemberton. They clean up the dead." "You're not dead, ma'am." Lyra looked at the older woman, really looked at her. Mrs. Pemberton had kind eyes and strong hands, and had probably seen more of the truth in this house than anyone else. "No," Lyra agreed softly. "Not yet." That night, Adrian came home. Lyra heard the commotion from her bedroom, the front doors opening, boots on marble, the low rumble of male voices. She sat at her writing desk, where she had been composing a letter to her sister in Bath, and felt her body tense in automatic response. 7 years, and his presence still affected her like a change in atmospheric pressure. She listened to him climb the stairs, listened to his footsteps pass her door without pausing, heading to his own chambers in the West Wing. The geography of their separation was carved into the very architecture of the house. The knock, when it came 20 minutes later, was unexpected. "Come in." Adrian Blackthorne entered her private space like a storm crossing a threshold. At 35, he was a man built by war and hardened by disappointment, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that tended to fall across his forehead and eyes the color of a winter sea. His face was all sharp angles and stern lines, handsome in the way that cliffs are handsome. Impressive, dangerous, best admired from a distance. He still wore his traveling clothes, dust on his boots, tension in his jaw. "My mother visited today," he said without preamble. "She did." "She upset you?" It wasn't a question. Lyra set down her pen with careful precision, buying herself a moment to study him. He stood near the door, keeping distance between them as he always did, as if proximity might crack the ice he'd built around himself. "Your mother has certain expectations that remain unfulfilled," Lyra said. "It causes her distress." "She wants an heir." "Most dowagers do." Something flickered in his expression. Irritation, maybe, or guilt. With Adrian, emotions were like fish beneath dark water. You knew they were there, but you rarely saw them surface. I'll speak with her, he said. That's unnecessary. She shouldn't harass you about matters that are... He stopped, the sentence dying unfinished. Matters that are my fault, Lyra filled in silently. Matters that are the result of our arrangement. Matters we don't discuss because discussing them would require acknowledging this disaster we call a marriage. Your mother is protective of the Blackthorn legacy, Lyra said, her voice diplomat smooth. It's natural for her to have concerns. Natural, Adrian repeated, tasting the word like poison. There's nothing natural about any of this. He gestured vaguely between them, encompassing the chasm of their marriage, the years of careful avoidance, the profound loneliness of two people living in the same house but separate lives. Lyra felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Not hope. She'd murdered hope years ago, but something sharper. Anger, maybe. Or the distant cousin of courage. Then perhaps, she said carefully, we should discuss what would be natural, what this marriage could be if we chose differently. The silence that fell was absolute. Adrian stared at her as if she'd spoken in tongues. In 7 years, they'd never had this conversation. They'd maintained their polite fiction, their civilized distance, their mutual pretense that this was acceptable. Lyra. Her name was Catherine Somerset, Lyra continued, her voice steady as bedrock. Your mother mentioned you danced with her 3 times at the Hartley Ball, the widow, the woman who you Stop. The word cracked like a whip. But Lyra didn't stop, couldn't stop. 7 years of silence was enough. The woman who left you at the altar, she said. The woman you've been in love with since you were 20. The woman whose ghost has lived in this house longer than I have. Adrian's face went white, then red. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. You know nothing about... I know everything, Lyra cut in, rising from her chair. I know you married me because your father demanded you take a wife before he died. I know you chose me because I was appropriate and available and unlikely to cause trouble. I know you've spent 7 years wishing I was someone else. Anyone else. Her. That's not... It's absolutely true. Lyra moved toward him, closing the distance he always maintained. And I know that she's back in society now, widowed, available, everything you ever wanted, finally within reach. Adrian's jaw worked. His eyes blazed with something caught between fury and pain. What do you want from me? He demanded. Apologies. Explanations. I never lied to you about what this marriage was. No, Lyra agreed. You never lied. You simply never tried. The words hung between them, sharp as broken glass. I gave you a title, Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. A home, security, respect. You gave me a cage with velvet bars, Lyra shot back, and you gave it without ever once asking if I wanted it. You accepted the proposal. I was 19 years old with a dying father and 4 younger siblings depending on the marriage settlement. What choice did I have? Adrian flinched as if she'd struck him. Good. Let him feel something, even if it was guilt. If you're so miserable, he said, his voice dropping to something almost cruel, perhaps you should have refused. Perhaps I should have, Lyra said. But I didn't. I stood in that chapel and made vows I intended to keep, vows you've honored in law but betrayed in every way that matters. I've never been unfaithful. Haven't you? Lyra's laugh was bitter. You've given your heart to a ghost and your nights to anyone but me. You've built walls so high I'd need wings to scale them. You've made me irrelevant in my own marriage. Then what do you want? Adrian roared, his control finally cracking. What would satisfy you? Should I pretend, lie, force myself to feel something I don't? The question should have devastated her. Instead, it clarified everything. I want you to let me go, Lyra said quietly. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the rain still hammering against the windows, the distant tick of the hall clock, the thunder of her own heartbeat. Adrian stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. What? Let me go, Lyra repeated, each word clear as crystal. Give me an annulment or a legal separation. Let me return to my family or set up a household of my own. Free yourself to pursue the woman you actually want. End this farce. That's... Adrian's voice caught. That's not possible. Why not? Because you're my wife. In name only, in law only, not in any way that actually matters. The scandal would be devastating, I know. Lyra smiled without humor. Your mother would never forgive you. Society would be appalled. The Blackthorn reputation would suffer terribly, but you'd survive it, and eventually you could remarry. You could have the life you actually want instead of this half-existence we're both enduring. Adrian looked stricken, his face a battlefield of emotions he couldn't seem to organize. He opened his mouth, closed it, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. I'm asking for freedom, for both of us. Lyra. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer or a curse. She couldn't tell which. I can't. Even if I wanted to, the legal complications alone would be significant, yes, but not insurmountable. Not for a man with your resources and connections. And your family? The marriage settlement supports them. If we separate the terms, I would manage, Lyra said, though the thought terrified her. My siblings are nearly grown now. My brother has prospects. We would survive. This is insane. Adrian paced to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. You're my wife. That's not something that can simply be undone because it's become inconvenient. Inconvenient? Lyra's voice went flat. Is that what you call 7 years of loneliness? Inconvenient? What I call it is irrelevant. Marriage is a contract, a commitment. It's not meant to be dissolved the moment it becomes difficult. Difficult would be an improvement, Lyra said. Difficult implies there's something there to struggle with. We have nothing. We are nothing to each other. Adrian spun to face her, his eyes blazing. That's not true. Isn't it? Name one thing we share besides this house and a surname. We share. He stopped, searching. We share responsibilities, duties. We share a prison, Lyra finished. We share a prison we both walked into willingly and locked from the inside. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. His shoulders sagged. He looked at her with something that might have been sadness or might have been exhaustion. With Adrian, it was always hard to tell. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly. Then let me leave. I can't. Won't. Can't. His voice was firm now, decided. I won't release you from this marriage, Lyra. Whatever you think of me, whatever you feel or don't feel, we made vows. I intend to honor them. By ignoring me? By treating me like furniture? By maintaining the commitment we made. He moved toward the door, their conversation clearly over in his mind. I'm sorry if that's not enough for you, but it's what I can offer. He was leaving. Actually leaving, walking away from the first real conversation they'd had in 7 years, as if it meant nothing. Something broke in Lyra's chest. Not her heart, that had broken long ago, but something deeper. The wall she'd built around her resignation. The acceptance she'd wrapped around herself like armor. She doesn't love you, Lyra said to his retreating back. Adrian froze, his hand on the door handle. Catherine Somerset, Lyra continued, her voice steady as stone. She doesn't love you. She never did. She left you at the altar not because she was frightened or confused, but because she wanted someone richer. She married Lord Somerset for his fortune, and if the rumors are true, she poisoned him for his inheritance. She's a predator, Adrian, and you're so blinded by what she was 10 years ago that you can't see what she's become. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Your mother mentioned the talk about Lord Somerset's death, riding accident officially, but there's been speculation, whispers about his sudden illness beforehand, about Catherine inheriting everything despite his family's protests. Gossip. Adrian's voice was hard. Society loves to tear down beautiful women. Society loves scandal, Lyra corrected, but sometimes the scandal is true. Adrian turned to face her, his expression colder than she'd ever seen it. Why are you doing this? Why attack a woman you've never met? I'm not attacking her, I'm warning you. Lyra held his gaze, refusing to look away. She's returning to society now that her mourning period is ending. She'll be at the Pemberton Ball next week. Your mother mentioned it, and if I know anything about predators, she'll be circling you before the first dance ends. Even if that were true, it is true. It wouldn't matter. I'm married. To a wife you ignore, to a marriage you resent. You're vulnerable, Adrian. Can't you see that? What I see, Adrian said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is my wife making wild accusations about a woman she's jealous of. The word hit like a slap. Jealous. As if Lyra's warnings came from envy rather than clarity. As if 7 years of watching him pine for another woman had clouded her judgment rather than sharpened it. I'm not jealous, Lyra said, her voice ice cold now. I'm practical, and I'm telling you that if you pursue Catherine Somerset, you'll regret it. Thank you for your concern, Adrian said with elaborate courtesy that felt like mockery. But I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs. He left. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a cell door locking. Lyra stood in the center of her bedroom, trembling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Not anger, though there was that. Not heartbreak, though pieces of her felt raw. Something else. Something that felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes still and the world holds its breath. She'd shown her hand. Revealed that she'd been watching, analyzing, caring more than she should. She'd warned him about Catherine, exposed her own loneliness, and asked for freedom. All of it tactical errors in the chess game of their marriage. And Adrian had rejected every move. But Lyra hadn't survived 7 years in this house by giving up when the first strategy failed. She returned to her writing desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Her hand was steady as she began to write. Not to her sister this time, but to someone else. Someone who might have the information she needed. Because if Adrian wouldn't listen to warnings, perhaps he'd listen to proof. And if Catherine Somerset was truly the predator Lyra suspected, then the hunt was about to begin. The rain continued to fall outside, relentless as time, washing the moors clean while inside Blackthorn Manor, a ghost of a duchess finally decided to become real. The question was no longer whether she could survive this marriage. The question was whether she could turn it into a weapon. The letter arrived 3 days later, sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Lyra broke the seal in the privacy of her morning room, where pale sunlight filtered through gauze curtains and painted everything in shades of ghost. The handwriting inside was cramped, efficient, belonging to a man who valued information over aesthetics. Your Grace, regarding your inquiry into the late Lord Somerset's demise, the official cause was complications from a riding accident. The unofficial cause is more interesting. Somerset suffered severe stomach ailments for 3 weeks prior to his fall. Vomiting, weakness, pain. His physician attributed it to bad oysters. His brother attributed it to arsenic. The brother demanded an inquest. The inquest found nothing conclusive. Lady Somerset inherited everything. The brother died 6 months later. Different physician, same symptoms. I can provide more detail in person should you require it. My rates remain as discussed. J. Thorne, Private Inquiry Agent Lyra, read the letter twice, then held it to the candle flame and watched it curl into ash. The evidence wasn't proof, not the kind that would stand in court, but it was enough to confirm her instincts. Catherine Somerset was dangerous, and she was hunting. The question was, what did she hunt for? Money? Title? Or something darker? Revenge against the man who'd moved on after she'd abandoned him? Your Grace, Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, her face carefully neutral. The Duke requests your presence in his study. Adrian never requested her presence anywhere. For a moment, Lyra's heart performed an odd little skip. Hope, perhaps, that their confrontation 3 nights ago had cracked something open between them. Then reality reasserted itself. Adrian didn't crack. He endured. She found him behind his massive oak desk, papers spread before him like battle maps. He looked up when she entered, and she saw it immediately. The tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. Something had happened. Close the door, he said. She did. The study smelled of leather and tobacco, masculine and foreign. She'd been in this room perhaps a dozen times in 7 years, always briefly, always feeling like an intruder in enemy territory. There's a ball, Adrian said without preamble. The Ashworth Ball, next Friday. We've been invited. We're going. Lyra blinked. We're both going? Yes. Together? That is generally how married couples attend social functions. The sarcasm was unlike him. Adrian preferred cold silence to cutting remarks. Something had rattled him. May I ask why the sudden interest in society events? Lyra asked carefully. You've avoided them for years. My mother believes our absence fuels gossip about the state of our marriage. He shuffled papers with unnecessary force. She's convinced our lack of public appearances suggests difficulties. She's not wrong. Adrian's eyes snapped to hers, sharp as glass. Nevertheless, we will attend, together. We will dance, we will appear united, and you will help me dispel whatever rumors are currently circulating. Ah, there it was. Not an olive branch, but a command performance. Lyra was to be his prop, his evidence of marital normalcy trotted out to satisfy his mother's demands and society's expectations. Of course, Lyra said, her voice empty of inflection. I live to serve the Blackthorn reputation. Don't. Adrian's voice went sharp. Don't do that. Do what? Pretend to be meek. You're many things, Lyra, but meek isn't one of them. Not after the other night. The reference to their argument hung between them like smoke. Lyra met his gaze and refused to look away. What would you prefer? Honesty? Very well, I think this is a terrible idea. I think parading our failed marriage in front of society will only highlight its failures, and I think Catherine will be there, Adrian cut in. The words landed like stones in still water. Of course she would be. The Ashworth Ball was one of the season's premier events. A widowed lady of Catherine Somerset's beauty and wealth would naturally be invited. I see, Lyra said slowly, and you want me there as, what? A shield, a reminder of your marital status? I want you there because you're my wife. How convenient that you remember that now. Adrian's hands flattened on the desk. I'm trying, Lyra. I'm trying to do what you asked, to make this marriage more than a legal fiction. Attending events together, presenting a united front, isn't that what couples do? Couples who actually speak to each other? Yes. Couples who use each other as armor against old lovers? That's something else entirely. What do you want from me? Adrian's voice rose, frustration cracking through his composure. You said I ignore you. Now I'm including you and it's still wrong? Because your reasons are wrong. Lyra stepped closer to the desk, her own control fraying. You don't want me there because you value my company. You want me there because you're afraid of what seeing Catherine will do to you, and you need a witness to keep you honest. The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian stared at her with something like shock, as if he'd never considered she might understand him that well. You're right, he said finally, the admission clearly costing him. I am afraid. Does that satisfy you? Honesty, actual, raw honesty, from a man who hoarded his emotions like a miser hoarded gold. Lyra felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. No, she said quietly. It doesn't satisfy me, but it's a start. Adrian looked away, his jaw working. Will you come? To the ball? Yes? Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might regret bringing me. His eyes snapped back to hers, questioning. But Lyra simply turned and left before he could ask what she meant. Some strategies were best kept close. The next week passed in a flurry of preparation that felt like arming for war. Lyra's lady's maid, a quiet woman named Sarah, who'd been with her since the wedding, helped her choose a gown, deep emerald silk that brought out the auburn in her hair and made her pale skin luminous rather than washed out. You look like a queen, Your Grace, Sarah murmured, pinning Lyra's hair into an elaborate coiffure that was both elegant and severe. I look like a woman preparing for battle, Lyra corrected. Isn't that what society is for ladies? One long battlefield? Lyra met Sarah's eyes in the mirror and saw understanding there. Sarah had worked in great houses her entire life. She knew what women endured, the weapons they used, the wars they fought with smiles painted on like war paint. Then let's make sure I'm properly armed, Lyra said. The night of the Ashworth Ball arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like cosmic mockery. Clear skies, gentle breeze, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. Lyra descended the stairs to find Adrian waiting in the entrance hall, dressed in severe black evening wear that made him look like a prince from a dark fairy tale. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. His eyes traveled from her face to her gown and back again. You look... He stopped, searching for words. Acceptable? Lyra supplied, keeping her voice neutral. Remarkable, Adrian corrected quietly. You look remarkable. The compliment shouldn't have affected her. 7 years of indifference had inoculated her against his rare moments of regard. But something in his voice, genuine, almost vulnerable, slipped past her defenses like a knife between ribs. Thank you, she said, and meant it. The carriage ride to London was conducted in silence, but it was different from their usual silences. Less empty, more full of things unsaid. Adrian sat across from her, his face half-shadowed by the passing streetlights, and several times she caught him looking at her as if trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. The Ashworth mansion blazed with light, every window brilliant, music spilling out into the night. Carriages lined the street, depositing their glittering cargo of aristocrats and social climbers, all dressed in their finest, all ready to see and be seen. Ready? Adrian asked as their carriage stopped. No, Lyra said honestly. But when has that ever mattered? His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He descended first, then offered his hand to help her down. His grip was firm, warm through her glove, and he didn't release her immediately. Instead, he tucked her hand into the crook of his arm in a gesture that looked natural, practiced, almost affectionate. Stay close, he murmured as they climbed the steps. Where else would I go? They entered the ballroom together, and Lyra felt the exact moment the crowd noticed them. It rippled through the room like a stone through water, heads turning, conversations pausing, eyes tracking their progress. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn appearing together in public for the first time in years. It was enough to make the gossips salivate. Lyra! Adrian! Eleanor Blackthorn materialized from the crowd like a ship under full sail, resplendent in purple silk and diamond jewelry. How wonderful that you came! Together! The emphasis on the last word was pointed enough to draw blood. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She'd gotten what she wanted. Her son and daughter-in-law presenting the illusion of marital harmony. Mother, Adrian said evenly, you look well. I feel well, especially now. Eleanor took Lyra's free hand and squeezed it with surprising warmth. You look absolutely lovely, my dear. That color is divine on you. The compliment was so unexpected that Lyra almost missed her next words. You'll want to greet the Ashworths, of course. And Lady Somerset is here. She's been asking about you, Adrian. There it was, the trap, sprung with maternal efficiency. Has she? Adrian said flatly. Oh, yes. She's by the terrace doors. Shall I introduce Lyra? They've never met, have they? That won't be necessary, Lyra said smoothly. I'm sure Lady Somerset and I will have opportunities to become acquainted throughout the evening. Eleanor's smile sharpened. I'm sure you will. She drifted away, leaving them standing at the edge of the ballroom like soldiers surveying a battlefield. And there, across the glittering expanse of dancers and decorations, Lyra saw her. Catherine Somerset. She was beautiful. Lyra had expected that. Adrian's devotion demanded extraordinary beauty to justify it. But seeing her in person was still like taking a punch to the stomach. Golden hair arranged in perfect curls, skin like porcelain, a figure that made her rose-colored gown look like it had been painted on. She stood near the terrace doors, surrounded by admirers, holding court like a queen receiving tribute. And she was looking directly at Adrian with an expression that managed to be both innocent and predatory. There she is, Lyra said quietly. Adrian said nothing. His entire body had gone rigid, his hand tightening on her arm enough to be almost painful. Adrian, Lyra said sharply. He blinked, awareness returning. I'm fine. You're not. You look like you've seen a ghost. Haven't I? His voice was rough, almost raw. She looks exactly the same, as if 10 years never passed. 10 years passed, Lyra said firmly. She's not the same woman. Neither are you. No, Adrian agreed. I'm married now, to someone else, to you. The way he said it, as if reminding himself, as if the fact of their marriage was a chain rather than a choice. made something cold settle in Lyra's stomach. "Dance with me," she said abruptly. Adrian looked at her, startled. "What?" "Dance with me. Now, before Catherine can cross this room and claim you." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "You want to stake your territory. I want to remind this room that you have a wife, and I want Catherine Somerset to see that she can't simply walk back into your life as if nothing happened." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he straightened, offered his arm more formally, and led her onto the dance floor just as a waltz began. The last time they'd danced together had been at their wedding, 7 years ago, in front of different witnesses, during a different lifetime. Adrian had held her correctly but distantly, fulfilling an obligation. Now, as he pulled her into position, his hand at her waist, her hand in his, Lyra felt the difference immediately. He was present, actually present, looking at her rather than through her. "You're a good dancer," he said as they began to move. "You sound surprised." "I am. I don't think I've ever actually paid attention." "No," Lyra agreed. "You haven't." They spun through the other couples, their movements synchronized with a competence that came from good training rather than practice together. Around them, Lyra could feel eyes watching, judging, speculating. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, together at last. What did it mean? Had their cold marriage thawed? Or was this merely performance? "Everyone's staring," Adrian muttered. "Let them. We're quite the spectacle." "You don't seem bothered." "I've spent 7 years being invisible, Adrian. Being seen, even being scrutinized, is almost a relief." His hand tightened at her waist, pulling her infinitesimally closer. "You were never invisible." "To everyone else? Perhaps not. To you? I was furniture, useful, appropriate, easily ignored." "That's not—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I never meant to make you feel that way. Intentions matter less than actions." "Then let me act differently now." The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the floor, other couples parting around them like water around stones. Adrian looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, determination mixed with something that might have been regret. "Adrian?" The voice came from behind him, feminine, cultured, honey-sweet. They both turned. Catherine Somerset stood there, resplendent and smiling, her eyes fixed on Adrian with the intensity of a cat watching a bird. "Catherine," Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral. "It's been so long." Catherine's gaze flickered to Lyra, dismissive as a glance at a servant. "And you must be the Duchess. How lovely to finally meet you." The words were correct, but the tone made them an insult. Lyra felt the slight land like a slap, intentional, calculated, designed to establish hierarchy. "Lady Somerset," Lyra said coolly, "my condolences on your loss." Catherine's smile never wavered. "You're too kind, though loss is perhaps too strong a word. My marriage was complicated." "Most marriages are," Lyra said. "The successful ones learn to navigate complications. The failures—" She let the sentence hang, pregnant with implication. A flash of something sharp crossed Catherine's face, annoyance, maybe, or recognition that Lyra wasn't the doormat she'd expected. "Adrian, would you honor me with a dance?" Catherine asked, turning her full attention back to him as if Lyra had ceased to exist. "For old time's sake?" The request was outrageous. A widow asking a married man to dance in front of his wife, using familiarity that predated the marriage as justification. Society's rules were being bent, if not broken, and Catherine knew it. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push. Adrian hesitated. Lyra could see the war in his expression, duty to his wife versus desire for the woman he'd never stopped loving. The moment stretched, excruciating. "I'm afraid the Duke promised me the next dance," Lyra said smoothly, reclaiming Adrian's arm with a possessiveness that surprised even her. "And the one after that. We have years of lost time to make up for. I'm sure you understand." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Of course. How devoted. Isn't it?" Lyra met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. "Devotion is so rare in marriages these days, but Adrian and I have found it essential. Haven't we, darling?" The endearment felt foreign on her tongue, but it achieved its purpose. Adrian's attention snapped to her, surprise written clearly on his face. Then, to her shock, he smiled, small but genuine. Essential, he agreed, covering her hand with his. If you'll excuse us, Lady Somerset, my wife and I have much to discuss. He led Lyra away, leaving Catherine standing alone near the dance floor, her perfect smile frozen in place. They didn't speak until they reached the relative privacy of the terrace, where the night air was cool against Lyra's flushed skin. That was, Adrian started. Necessary, Lyra finished. She was marking you like territory. I simply reminded her that you're already claimed. You called me darling. I called you many things in my head. Darling was the most socially acceptable. Adrian laughed, actual laughter, short and startled. I've never seen you like this. Territorial. Almost fierce. You've never seen me at all, Lyra corrected, but you're seeing me now. And so is she. Why? Adrian asked, his voice dropping. Why fight for a marriage you wanted to leave? Because I understand strategy better than you do. Lyra turned to face him fully. Catherine Somerset is a predator. She doesn't want you because she loves you. She wants you because you're powerful, wealthy, and apparently still pining for her like a lovesick boy. She wants to prove she can reclaim what she once discarded. You don't know that. Don't I? She ignored you when I claimed the next dances. That's not how a woman in love responds. That's how a woman denied a prize responds. Adrian's jaw tightened. You think very little of me if you believe I'm simply a prize to be won. I think very little of her, and I think you're blind where she's concerned. Lyra stepped closer, close enough to see the storm in his eyes. But I also think that whether you appreciate it or not, we're bound together. And I won't let her destroy what little we have simply because you can't see her clearly. What we have is nothing, Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then we have nothing to lose by fighting for it. They stood in the darkness, the sounds of the ball drifting through the open doors, the weight of 7 years and 1 evening pressing down on them both. Then Adrian did something unexpected. He cupped her face in his hand, gentle, careful, as if she might shatter. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of it. For using you tonight, for using you for 7 years, for being so caught in the past that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Lyra's breath caught. Adrian, let me finish. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, a touch so tender it made her eyes sting. You were right about everything, about Catherine, about our marriage, about me. And watching you tonight, watching you fight for us when I've given you no reason to. Your Grace, Your Grace. A footman burst onto the terrace, his face pale with urgency. You must come at once. There's been an incident inside. They rushed back into the ballroom to find chaos. A crowd had gathered near the refreshment table, voices rising in alarm. Through the press of bodies, Lyra saw Eleanor Blackthorne sitting in a chair, her face gray, one hand pressed to her chest. Mother! Adrian pushed through the crowd, Lyra right behind him. Eleanor looked up at them, her breathing labored. I'm fine. Just a dizzy spell. You're not fine, Adrian said sharply. We're calling for a physician. Don't be ridiculous. I simply need air and… Eleanor's words cut off as her body convulsed, her face contorting in pain. Someone fetch a doctor, Lyra commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. She knelt beside Eleanor, taking her hand. What did you eat? What did you drink? Just a punch, Eleanor gasped. The punch tasted strange. Lyra's blood went cold. She looked up, scanning the crowd, and found Catherine Somerset standing at the edge of the gathering, her face arranged in perfect concern. But her eyes held something else entirely. Calculation. And in that moment, Lyra knew with absolute certainty this was no accident. The physician arrived within 20 minutes, but by then Eleanor's convulsions had subsided into violent trembling. Lyra held the older woman's hand while Adrian paced like a caged wolf, his face carved from stone in fury. The ballroom had been cleared except for close family and the Ashworths, who fluttered about uselessly, wringing their hands and offering apologies for something they couldn't have prevented. Arsenic, the physician said quietly, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was an older man, gray-haired and competent, with the kind of steady demeanor that came from seeing too much death. Or something very like it. The symptoms are unmistakable: the stomach pain, the tremors, the metallic taste she described. Will she live? Adrian's voice was barely controlled. I've induced vomiting and administered charcoal. If the dose was small enough, if we caught it early enough, yes, she should recover. But it was close, Your Grace. Very close. Lyra felt Adrian's hand find hers, gripping tight enough to hurt. She squeezed back, anchoring him. Who would do this? Lady Ashworth whispered, her face pale. At my ball? In my home? Someone who wanted to make a statement, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. Someone who wanted to demonstrate power. She looked up and found Catherine Somerset still lingering at the edge of the room, her face arranged in perfect sympathy. Their eyes met across the space, and Catherine's mouth curved into the smallest smile, there and gone so quickly that anyone else would have missed it. But Lyra saw it. Lyra saw everything. I want the punch analyzed, Adrian said to the physician. Every glass? Every bottle? I want to know exactly what was in it and how it got there. Of course, Your Grace. And I want everyone questioned. Everyone who was near the refreshment table, everyone who served the drinks, everyone who… Adrian, Lyra's quiet voice cut through his escalating fury. Not here. Not now. He looked at her, wild-eyed, and she saw the boy he must have been before war and betrayal had hardened him, frightened, helpless, desperate to protect, and unable to do so. We need to get your mother home, Lyra continued. She needs rest and safety. The investigation can wait until morning. Someone tried to kill her. Yes, and making a scene now will only alert them that we know. Better to let them think they succeeded in causing chaos. Let them get comfortable. Adrian's jaw worked, but he nodded slowly. You're right. He stopped, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. How are you so calm? I'm not calm. I'm controlled. There's a difference. They transported Eleanor back to Blackthorn House in London, a smaller townhouse but secure, with staff Adrian trusted absolutely. Lyra rode in the carriage with Eleanor while Adrian followed on horseback, unable to sit still, burning off his fury and physical exertion. You think it was her? Eleanor whispered, her voice weak but her mind sharp as ever. Catherine. Lyra didn't insult her by pretending confusion. Yes. Why? To demonstrate power, to create vulnerability, to show Adrian that anyone close to him can be touched. Lyra smoothed the blanket over Eleanor's trembling form, and possibly to remove you as an obstacle. An obstacle to what? To reclaiming your son. Eleanor's laugh was bitter and cut short by a wince of pain. She never wanted him, not really. She wanted the title, the wealth. When Somerset offered more, she took it without a backward glance. And now Somerset is dead, and she's back. Lyra met Eleanor's eyes. But this time there's a wife in the way. A wife she assumed would be easy to remove or intimidate. She doesn't know you very well, does she? No one does, Lyra said quietly. That's been my advantage. Eleanor's hand found hers, squeezing with surprising strength. I misjudged you. All these years I thought you were weak, passive. I resented you for not giving Adrian children, for not making him happy, for not being enough. You weren't wrong about most of that. I was wrong about all of it. Eleanor's eyes were fierce despite her weakened state. You're not weak, you're strategic, and you see Catherine clearly, which is more than my son has ever managed. He loved her. He loved an illusion, a girl who never really existed. Eleanor coughed, her face contorting. The question is, what will you do about it? Whatever is necessary, Lyra said. Whatever it takes to protect this family. Even though we've never protected you? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and honest. Lyra could have deflected, could have offered platitudes. Instead, she chose truth. You're my family, for better or worse, the only one I have left, and I don't abandon what's mine. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, pain or emotion, or both. Then I'm glad Adrian married you, even if he was too much of a fool to know what he'd gotten. They reached Blackthorn House to find it blazing with light, servants rushing to prepare rooms and summon more physicians. Adrian met them at the door, his face haggard, and together they got Eleanor settled in a bedroom with round-the-clock nursing care. It was nearly 3 in the morning when Adrian and Lyra finally stood alone in the hallway outside Eleanor's room, exhausted and strung tight with tension. "I should return to the manor," Lyra said. "You'll want to stay with your mother." "No." Adrian's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Stay, please." The word "please" sounded foreign in his mouth, unused to asking rather than commanding. "Adrian, I need you here." His grip tightened, not painful but desperate. "You see things I don't. You think clearly when I can't. And if someone is targeting my family, targeting my mother, then you're in danger too. I need you where I can protect you." "Or where I can protect you," Lyra said softly. His laugh was short, sharp. "Yes, that too, apparently." They stood in the dim hallway, the house settling around them, and something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but something closer to partnership, recognition, respect. "There's a guest room prepared," Adrian said, "but my chambers are larger, more secure. You're welcome to—" He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. "That is, if you'd feel safer." "I'll take the guest room," Lyra said, saving him from his awkward offer. "But thank you." "Of course." He released her wrist slowly, reluctantly. "Lyra? Yes?" "What you did tonight, claiming those dances, standing up to Catherine, staying calm when everyone else panicked." He struggled with the words, unused to expressing gratitude. "Thank you. For fighting when you had no reason to." "I had every reason," Lyra corrected. "She came into my territory and threatened my people. That's reason enough." She left him standing in the hallway, his eyes following her until she disappeared into the guest room. Only then did she allow herself to shake, to feel the full weight of what had happened. Someone had tried to kill Eleanor. Someone had poisoned her at a public event, brazen and confident. And unless Lyra was very wrong, that someone was sleeping peacefully in her own bed right now, satisfied with the chaos she'd created. But Catherine Somerset had made a crucial error. She'd assumed Lyra was collateral damage, a minor obstacle easily removed or ignored. She'd revealed her hand too early, shown her teeth before securing the kill. And now Lyra knew exactly what kind of predator she was hunting. The next morning brought rain, cold, relentless, turning London's streets to rivers of mud. Lyra woke early, dressed in a severe gray morning gown, and found Adrian already in his study, surrounded by reports from the physician and statements from servants. "Arsenic," he confirmed without preamble when she entered. "Definitely arsenic. Someone put it in the punch bowl, but we can't determine who. Too many people had access." "It wasn't random," Lyra said, closing the door behind her. "It was targeted. Your mother's glass specifically." "How do you know?" "Because if they'd wanted mass casualties, they would have poisoned the entire bowl. Instead, they chose a single glass, ensuring maximum drama with minimum legal exposure. If Eleanor had died, it could have been ruled natural, an older woman suffering a heart episode brought on by excitement." Adrian's face went white, then red. "You've thought about this. A lot." "I've thought about Catherine a lot," Lyra corrected. "About what she wants, how she thinks, what she's capable of. And I'm telling you, Adrian, she's escalating. Last night was a warning shot. Next time, she'll aim to kill." "You can't know that." "Can't I? What do we know about her? She married for money. Her husband died under suspicious circumstances. His brother questioned the death and then died the same way. She's back in society hunting for another wealthy husband, and the man she once claimed to love is conveniently married to a woman she perceives as weak. She doesn't even know you." "Exactly, which means she's judging me based on what she sees. A quiet, invisible wife who's tolerated 7 years of neglect. She thinks I'm broken. Thinks I'll crumble under pressure or run away entirely, leaving you vulnerable." Adrian stood, moving to the window that overlooked the rain-soaked street. "What if you're wrong? What if this is all coincidence and you're seeing plots where there's only tragedy?" "Then your mother nearly died by accident and I'm paranoid," Lyra said evenly. "But if I'm right and we do nothing, the next victim might actually die. Might be you, or me, or both of us." He turned to face her, his expression anguished. "What do you want me to do? I can't accuse her without proof. I can't. His voice caught. I can't believe she'd do this. Not Catherine, not the girl I knew. The girl you knew doesn't exist anymore. Lyra's control finally cracked, her voice rising. She grew into a woman who kills for money and power, and you're so blinded by what she was that you can't see what she's become. And you're so determined to paint her as a villain that you can't see anything else. They stared at each other across his study, 7 years of frustration and fear and unspoken truths crackling between them like lightning. Fine, Lyra said coldly. Don't believe me. Don't act. Sit here and wait for more evidence while she picks off everyone you care about one by one. I'm sure that will work out wonderfully. She turned to leave, but Adrian's voice stopped her. What would you do? If it were your decision, what would you do? Lyra turned back slowly. Adrian stood in the gray morning light, looking more lost than she'd ever seen him, and she realized he was actually asking for her counsel, trusting her judgment despite his own doubts. I would set a trap, Lyra said. I would give her exactly what she wants, access to you, opportunity, a clear path to victory, and then I would watch her take it and expose herself in the process. That's dangerous. Living is dangerous. At least this way we control the danger. Adrian studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. She could hurt you. If we do this, if we make you a visible target, I'm already a target. So are you. The only question is whether we fight back or wait to be destroyed. You've changed, Adrian said quietly. The woman I married would never have suggested this. The woman you married died slowly over 7 years of neglect, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the pain the words caused. I'm what's left, and I'm a lot harder to kill. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, regret perhaps, or recognition of damage done. I'm sorry. For all of it. For making you into something harder just to survive me. Don't apologize. Use it. We need hard right now. We need ruthless. Because Catherine Somerset is both those things, and if we're going to beat her, we need to think like she does. Adrian nodded slowly. Tell me your plan. Lyra moved to his desk, pulled out paper and pen, and began to write. First, we make our marriage visible, unavoidable. We attend every event, present a united front, show Catherine that you're not available, not emotionally, not physically, not at all. That won't stop her if she's determined. No, but it will force her to escalate, to take risks, and risks create mistakes. Lyra continued writing. Second, we feed her information. Let her think our marriage is strategic rather than real, that you're only with me for appearances. Give her hope that she can still win you back. How would we do that? Through my lady's maid, Sarah. She has a sister who works in Catherine's household. Information flows between servants like water. We use that. Adrian leaned over her shoulder, reading what she'd written. You've thought about this extensively. I've had nothing but time to think for 7 years. And third? Third, we give her an opportunity she can't refuse. A masked ball, here, in Blackthorn House. Invite everyone who matters. Create an environment where she can move freely, where masks provide cover, where she'll feel safe enough to act. You want to give her access to our home? To our people? I want to control the battlefield, Lyra corrected. In our house, we choose the terrain. We station people we trust. We watch her every move. And when she makes her play, because she will make a play, we catch her in the act. Adrian straightened, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. This is survival. She could kill you. She nearly killed my mother with a public poisoning. What makes you think she won't go after you? She will go after me, Lyra said calmly. That's the point. She sees me as the obstacle between her and what she wants. So we make me an irresistible target and catch her when she strikes. No. Adrian's voice was flat. Absolutely not. I won't use you as bait. You don't have a choice. I'm already in the game, Adrian. The question is whether we play to win or wait to lose. They stood in his study, the rain hammering against the windows, the weight of the decision pressing down on them both. Then Adrian did something that shocked her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. I can't lose you, he said into her hair. I know that's rich coming from me, the man who ignored you for 7 years. But somewhere in the last 24 hours I realized Losing you would destroy me. Not because of title or duty or any of that, because you're the strongest person I know, and I've been too blind to see it." Lyra stood frozen in his embrace, her heart hammering. This was new territory, uncharted and terrifying. Adrian had never held her, never shown this kind of raw emotion. "Then don't lose me," she said against his shoulder. "Fight with me. Trust me. Help me end this before she ends us." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands framing her jaw. "If we do this, if we set this trap, you follow my lead on security. You don't take unnecessary risks. I'll be as careful as the situation allows," Lyra interrupted. "But I won't hide while you face this alone." "Stubborn," Adrian muttered, but there was something like admiration in his voice. "Finally noticed?" He laughed, actual laughter, surprising them both. Then his expression turned serious. "We do this together. Partners. No more secrets, no more distance. If we're going to war with Catherine Somerset, we do it as a united front." "Partners," Lyra agreed, and felt something fundamental shift between them. Not love, not yet, but the foundation love could be built on. Trust, respect, choice. They spent the next week preparing. Adrian announced they would be hosting a masked ball in 3 weeks' time. Short notice by society standards, but acceptable given the Blackthorn name and wealth. Invitations went out to everyone who mattered, including Catherine Somerset. Meanwhile, Lyra set her own plans in motion. She met secretly with Jay Thorne, her inquiry agent, providing him with funds to investigate Catherine's finances, her movements, her associations. She coordinated with Sarah's sister, planting carefully crafted rumors about the state of the Blackthorn marriage. United in public, cold in private, strategic rather than passionate. And she attended every social event on Adrian's arm, playing the role of devoted Duchess while watching Catherine watch them. Catherine was everywhere now, at musicales and dinner parties, at the opera and garden parties, always beautiful, always charming, always making sure to cross paths with Adrian. And every time, Lyra saw the calculation in her eyes, the assessment of angles and opportunities. "She's getting bolder," Adrian murmured one evening as they returned from a theater performance where Catherine had contrived to be in the box next to theirs. "Good," Lyra said. "Bold means confident. Confident means careless. Or dangerous. Also that." Eleanor had recovered enough to receive visitors, though she remained weak. Lyra visited her daily, bringing books and gossip, and found an unexpected ally in her mother-in-law. "She came to see me yesterday," Eleanor said one afternoon, her voice still thin but her eyes sharp. "Catherine." Lyra looked up from her needlework. "Here?" "Yes. Brought flowers and sympathy, asked about my health with such concern." Eleanor's mouth twisted. "And then asked about Adrian, about whether he was coping well with the stress, about whether his marriage was strong enough to support him through difficult times." "What did you tell her?" "That my son and his wife have never been closer, that adversity has forged them into quite the formidable team." Eleanor smiled grimly. She didn't like that. No, she wouldn't. She asked me if I'd tasted anything strange before I fell ill, if I suspected anyone. Lyra's hands stilled on her needlework. Did she? Yes, as if she were helping investigate rather than covering her tracks. "Bold little thing." "Too bold," Lyra murmured. "She's testing boundaries, seeing what we know, what we suspect." "What will you do at your ball?" "Catch her," Lyra said simply. "One way or another, this ends that night." The invitation arrived at Catherine Somerset's townhouse on a Tuesday afternoon. Heavy cream paper, elegant script, sealed with the Blackthorn crest. She opened it in her drawing room, and even from across London, Lyra could almost feel her satisfaction. "The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn request the pleasure of your company at a masked ball." That evening, Sarah reported that Catherine had immediately commissioned a new gown. Blood red, scandalously low cut, paired with a black mask encrusted with crystals. "She's planning to make an impression," Sarah said quietly as she helped Lyra dress for dinner. "She's planning to make a move," Lyra corrected. "The question is what kind?" The answer came sooner than expected. 3 days before the ball, Lyra received a letter. It arrived with the morning post, mixed in with invitations and calling cards. Unremarkable, except for the lack of return address. She opened it in her morning room, expecting another social obligation. Instead, she found a threat. Duchess Lyra, you've played an admirable game, but games must end. Adrian belongs to someone who understands him, who loved him before duty and title complicated everything. Your marriage is a fiction built on convenience. Mine would be built on truth. Withdraw gracefully. Seek an annulment, a separation, anything that frees him. Do this, and I'll leave you alone. Refuse, and I'll remove you the same way I removed other obstacles. You have until the ball to decide. Choose wisely. A friend. Lyra read the letter 3 times, her hands steady despite the ice forming in her veins. No signature, but none was needed. Catherine had finally shown her teeth directly. No more subtlety or pretense. She was demanding Lyra's surrender or promising her death. What is it? Adrian asked, entering without knocking, a new habit since they'd become partners. Lyra handed him the letter, watched his face go from curious to furious in the space of a heartbeat. She threatened you. She actually threatened you in writing. Adrian's hands crushed the paper. That's it. I'm calling the magistrate. This is evidence. Of what? An unsigned letter that could have come from anyone? That proves nothing except that someone wants me gone. It's her handwriting. We don't have samples to compare it to, and even if we did, any decent lawyer would argue it's circumstantial. Lyra took the letter back, smoothing it carefully. No, this is better than legal evidence. This is psychological evidence. Explain. She's feeling pressured. Our united front is working. She's realized she can't simply wait for our marriage to crumble. So she's escalating, trying to force my hand, make me choose flight over fight. And you're going to... Fight, Lyra finished. But I'm going to let her think I'm considering flight. I'm going to send a response. She moved to her writing desk, pulled out paper, and began to write. Adrian read over her shoulder, his breath warm on her neck. Your terms are noted. I require time to consider the practicalities of what you suggest. The ball will give us an opportunity to discuss this privately, away from prying eyes. Meet me in the East Conservatory at midnight. Come alone, and we'll negotiate. You're inviting her to a private meeting, Adrian said slowly, where she'll have the perfect opportunity to expose herself, Lyra interrupted. She'll come armed, literally or figuratively. She'll make her play, and we'll be waiting. This is too dangerous. This is the only way. Lyra sealed the letter, called for a footman. Have this delivered to Lady Somerset's residence immediately. No return address. The footman left. Adrian gripped Lyra's shoulders, turning her to face him. I can't let you do this. You can't stop me. Lyra. She ends that night, Adrian. One way or another this ends. Either she reveals herself and we destroy her, or she succeeds in removing me, and you finally see her clearly. Lyra met his eyes steadily. Either way, the truth comes out. And if the truth is that I lose you, then you'll mourn appropriately and move on, Lyra said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. But I don't plan to lose. The 3 days before the ball passed in a blur of preparation. The ballroom was decorated in black and silver, dramatic and elegant. Security was tripled, men Adrian trusted absolutely, stationed throughout the house in servants' livery. The East Conservatory, where Lyra had arranged to meet Catherine, was prepared with hidden observation points. And Lyra prepared herself. She chose her gown carefully, midnight blue silk that made her look both beautiful and dangerous, paired with a silver mask that covered half her face. She looked like a creature from a dark fairy tale, and that felt appropriate. The night of the ball arrived with unseasonable cold, frost forming on the windows despite it being late spring. Guests began arriving at 9, their carriages clogging the street, their costumes and masks turning them into beautiful, anonymous strangers. Lyra stood at the top of the ballroom stairs with Adrian, greeting guests, watching for one mask in particular. Catherine arrived fashionably late, dressed in the blood-red gown Sarah had described, her mask black and glittering. She looked like sin personified, and the room noticed. But so did Lyra. And when their eyes met across the ballroom, Catherine's smile was sharp as broken glass. She got your letter, Adrian murmured. Yes. Now we wait. The ball proceeded with dazzling normalcy. Dancing and drinking, gossip and flirtation, all hidden behind masks that freed people to be more themselves or more false, depending on their nature. Lyra danced with Adrian, with other lords, playing her role perfectly while her mind counted down the hours until midnight. At 11:30, she excused herself, claiming fatigue. Adrian squeezed her hand once, hard, desperate, then let her go. She made her way through the crowded house to the East Conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants and the smell of earth and growing things. The space was dark except for moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling, casting everything in silver and shadow. Lyra positioned herself near the center, where she could be seen from the door, and waited. Behind the screen of ferns and flowering vines, she knew Adrian's men were stationed, watching, ready. Midnight came. The clock in the hall chimed 12 times, each note echoing through the silent conservatory. Then the door opened. Catherine Somerset entered alone, her red gown a slash of color in the monochrome room. She'd removed her mask, revealing her beautiful face arranged in an expression of triumph. "Duchess," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "how good of you to see reason." "Lady Somerset." Lyra kept her voice neutral, unthreatening. "You received my letter." "I did, and I'm pleased you understand the situation. Adrian deserves better than a loveless marriage to a woman who can't even give him an heir." "What Adrian deserves," Lyra said carefully, "is the truth. The truth is that he loves me, always has. You're simply the obstacle that stood between us." Catherine moved closer, and Lyra saw it. The bulge in her reticule, the weight of something metal and dangerous. "You brought a weapon," Lyra observed. "Insurance," Catherine corrected, her hand moving to the bag. "In case you prove difficult." "I won't be difficult, but I do want to understand. Lord Somerset, did you kill him?" Catherine's laugh was like bells, beautiful and hollow. "Somerset was a drunk and a fool who wasted his fortune on cards and horses. I simply accelerated his decline. He was dying anyway. I was merciful." "And his brother?" "Also an obstacle, also removed." Catherine's smile was radiant, proud. "I'm very good at removing obstacles, Duchess. It's a particular talent of mine." "Like poisoning Eleanor Blackthorne." "That was meant to be fatal, actually, but the dose was too conservative. I've learned from that mistake." Catherine pulled a small pistol from her reticule, delicate, deadly, pointed directly at Lyra's chest. "This is more reliable." Behind the plants, Lyra heard the whisper of movement, Adrian's men preparing to strike. But Catherine heard it too. Her eyes went wide, then narrow with rage. "You betrayed me," she hissed. "You brought witnesses." "I brought truth," Lyra said. "Everything you've said they've heard. Every confession, every admission of murder. You've destroyed yourself, Catherine." "Then I'll take you with me." Catherine's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot never came. Adrian exploded from behind a screen of palms, slamming into Catherine from the side, sending them both crashing into a display of orchids. The pistol flew from her hand, skittering across the floor. Lyra lunged for it, her hands closing around cold metal just as Catherine broke free from Adrian and charged at her with a scream of pure rage. They collided hard, Lyra's back slamming into the glass wall, the pistol trapped between their bodies. "You ruined everything!" Catherine shrieked, her hands around Lyra's throat. "He was mine. He was always mine." Lyra couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Black spots danced in her vision. Catherine's beautiful face above her was twisted with madness, all pretense of civilization stripped away. Then Adrian was there, pulling Catherine off, throwing her backward with enough force that she crashed into a fountain and lay still. Lyra collapsed, gasping, Adrian's hands on her face, her throat checking for damage. "I'm fine," she croaked. "I'm fine. Did they—" "We heard everything," a new voice said. The magistrate stepped from the shadows, followed by two constables. "Every word, every confession. Lady Somerset, you're under arrest for the murders of Lord Somerset and his brother and the attempted murder of the Dowager Duchess Blackthorne." Catherine struggled to her feet, water streaming from her ruined gown, her hair wild, her beauty transformed into something feral. "You can't prove anything," she spat. "It's her word against mine. It's your word against yourself," the magistrate corrected. "You confessed, in front of witnesses. You're done, my lady." As the constables moved to restrain her, Catherine's eyes found Lyra one last time. and in them Lyra saw not remorse but pure concentrated hatred. "He'll never love you," Catherine said, her voice venomous. "You won, but you won nothing. He'll always wish you were me." Then she was gone, dragged away screaming, leaving Lyra and Adrian alone in the ruined conservatory. They stood among the broken plants and shattered glass, breathing hard, alive. "She was wrong," Adrian said quietly, his hand still cradling Lyra's face. "About everything, especially that last part." Lyra looked up at him, saw something in his eyes that made her heart stutter, not the ghost of old love, but the birth of something new. "Adrian, I don't wish you were anyone else," he said fiercely. "I wish I'd seen you 7 years ago, really seen you. The woman you were, the woman you became. I wasted so much time chasing a ghost when I had a warrior standing right beside me." "We both wasted time," Lyra whispered. "Then let's not waste any more." He kissed her, actually kissed her, for the first time in their 7-year marriage. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like survival, like two people who'd walked through fire and found each other on the other side. When they broke apart, the ballroom was erupting in chaos as word spread of Catherine's arrest. But in the conservatory, there was only silence and silver moonlight and the beginning of something that might finally be real. The scandal exploded across London like a powder keg meeting flame. By dawn, every household in society knew that Lady Catherine Somerset had been arrested at the Blackthorn Ball for murder. Multiple murders, in fact, confessed in her own voice before witnesses. The magistrate's report detailed everything: the poisoning of Lord Somerset, the subsequent death of his brother, the attempted murder of the Dowager Duchess. Catherine's beauty, which had once opened doors, now made the story more delicious. The Ton devoured every detail with ravenous appetite. Lyra stood at the window of Blackthorn House, watching carriages arrive with their cargo of curious callers, all desperate for first-hand accounts. Her throat still ached where Catherine's hands had closed around it, purple bruises blooming like grotesque flowers against her pale skin. She'd covered them with a high-necked dress, but the memory remained. "You should rest," Adrian said from the doorway. He'd barely left her side since last night, hovering like a guard dog who'd finally found something worth protecting. "I should receive callers," Lyra corrected. "They'll come whether I want them or not. Better to control the narrative. Let them wait. Let them speculate. You nearly died last night." "But I didn't." She turned to face him, saw the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless hours. "And now we face the aftermath. This is just another battlefield, Adrian. Different weapons, same war." He crossed to her, his hands gentle as they traced the line of her jaw, carefully avoiding her bruised throat. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You know that? I'm the person you forced me to become." The words should have been accusatory, but they came out soft, almost forgiving. Because standing here in the morning light, having survived assassination and scandal, Lyra found she couldn't summon the anger she'd carried for 7 years. It had burned away in the conservatory, consumed by Catherine's madness and Adrian's desperate intervention. "I know," Adrian said quietly, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve what I destroyed and rebuilt." A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Pemberton entered with a silver tray piled high with calling cards. "The callers are becoming insistent, Your Grace. Lady Ashworth, Viscountess Grayson, the Pemberton sisters, Lady Hamilton. They all wish to speak with you, with both of you." Lyra exchanged glances with Adrian. "We'll receive them, together, in the main drawing room. Give us 15 minutes to prepare." Mrs. Pemberton nodded, understanding passing between the women. This was theater now, performance designed to shape perception. Lyra would need to appear strong but appropriately shaken, triumphant but not gloating. The balance was delicate. "What will you tell them?" Adrian asked as they descended the stairs together, his hand at the small of her back. A new habit, this constant touching, as if he needed physical confirmation of her survival. "The truth. Carefully edited, strategically deployed." Lyra straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "That Catherine Somerset was a murderer who targeted our family, that we suspected and set a trap, that justice was served through cleverness and courage. And our marriage? That nearly losing me made you realize what you'd taken for granted." She glanced at him, saw color rise in his cheeks. Is that not the truth? It's embarrassingly accurate. Then it will be convincing. The drawing room was already prepared, tea service laid out with military precision. They positioned themselves strategically, Lyra on the settee, Adrian standing behind her, one hand on her shoulder in a gesture of united strength. When the first callers were admitted, the tableau was perfect. Lady Ashworth entered first, her eyes wide with horrified fascination. "My dear Duchess, we heard the most extraordinary things, that Lady Somerset pulled a weapon on you, that she confessed to murder." "All true, I'm afraid," Lyra said, her voice steady. "She was quite mad by the end, obsessed with reclaiming what she'd abandoned years ago." "The Duke, you mean?" Viscountess Grayson said, settling into a chair with the air of someone prepared for a lengthy interrogation. "She wanted to replace you." "She wanted to remove me," Lyra corrected. "There's a difference. She saw me as an obstacle, not a person. She underestimated what that obstacle was willing to do to survive." "But how did you know?" Lady Hamilton leaned forward, her face alight with curiosity. "How did you suspect her?" "The poisoning at the Ashworth ball was too precise, too targeted. And then I received a letter, a threat, demanding I leave Adrian or face consequences." Lyra's hand rose unconsciously to her throat, touching the bruises beneath her high collar. "I realized she wouldn't stop. So we set a trap." "You used yourself as bait," Lady Ashworth breathed. "How incredibly brave. Or foolish." "Both," Adrian said, his hand tightening on Lyra's shoulder. "Definitely both. I tried to dissuade her, but my wife is remarkably stubborn when she decides something needs doing." The emphasis on "my wife" was deliberate, possessive. Lyra felt it resonate through the room, watched the ladies process this new dynamic between the Duke and Duchess, who'd spent 7 years in polite estrangement. "And you were there," Viscountess Grayson said to Adrian. "You saved her." "We saved each other," Adrian corrected. "Lyra secured the confession while I provided backup, though honestly I think she could have managed without me. She had the situation well in hand until Somerset became violent." "She tried to strangle you?" Lady Hamilton's voice rose to a scandalized pitch. "She did. Adrian intervened, Catherine was arrested, and now she'll face trial for her crimes." Lyra kept her voice matter-of-fact, refusing to dramatize what had been dramatic enough. The magistrate was quite thorough in documenting everything. The conversation continued for another hour, each caller asking variations of the same questions, hungry for details they could embellish and share. Lyra answered with practiced calm, revealing just enough to satisfy without providing ammunition for speculation about her own character. She was the wrong Duchess, the clever wife, the woman who'd defended her home and husband with intelligence and courage. By the time the last caller departed, exhaustion had settled into Lyra's bones like lead. "That was excruciating," she said when they were finally alone. "That was necessary," Adrian corrected. "You managed them perfectly. By tomorrow, every drawing room in London will be singing your praises, or questioning my judgment for marrying a man who remained in love with a murderess for a decade." Adrian flinched. "They wouldn't." "They absolutely would. Society loves nothing more than finding fault in women, even women who prevent their own murders." Lyra stood, swaying slightly. Adrian's hand steadied her immediately. "But it doesn't matter. Let them question. I know what I did and why." "Come on," Adrian said gently. "You need rest. Actual rest, not more performance." He guided her upstairs, not to the guest room she'd been using, but to his own chambers. Lyra stopped at the threshold. "Adrian, I'm not suggesting anything improper," he said quickly. "But my rooms are more secure and I need to know you're safe. You can have the bed. I'll take the chair." "We're married," Lyra pointed out. "Sharing a room isn't improper." "We've never shared a room. We've never done a lot of things. Perhaps it's time to start." She entered his private space, this room she'd never been invited into during 7 years of marriage. It was surprisingly Spartan, heavy furniture, dark colors, none of the decorative touches a woman might add. It felt like a military encampment, functional rather than comfortable. "It's very," Lyra searched for a diplomatic word. "Depressing?" Adrian supplied. "I know. I never saw the point of making it welcoming when I was the only one who'd see it. And now? Now I'm realizing how much of my life I've spent in self-imposed isolation. He helped her sit on the edge of the bed, removed her shoes with surprising gentleness. Punishing myself for Catherine's betrayal by refusing to let anyone else close, including your wife, especially my wife. He knelt before her, his eyes level with hers, because you were the reminder of what I'd lost. Every time I looked at you, I saw the life I'd been forced to accept instead of the one I'd wanted. The honesty hurt, but it was clean hurt, surgical rather than festering. And now? Lyra asked quietly. Now I look at you and see the life I could have had if I hadn't been such a blind fool. I see strength and intelligence and a kind of courage I never possessed. I see a partner I don't deserve but desperately want to keep. You don't have to keep me. The threat is gone. Catherine will hang for murder. You're free to seek an annulment, to find someone you actually chose. I choose you, Adrian interrupted fiercely. I know I have no right to ask for another chance. I know 7 years of neglect can't be erased with pretty words and sudden declarations, but I'm asking anyway. Let me try to be the husband I should have been from the start. Lyra studied his face, searching for deception or duty or pity. She found none of those things. Instead, she saw raw vulnerability, the kind that came from finally removing armor worn too long. I won't be easy to love, she warned. 7 years of survival made me hard, strategic. I calculate everything, trust nothing, and I've learned to protect myself first because no one else would. I know. I won't forgive quickly or completely. You hurt me, Adrian, profoundly, and while I understand why, understanding doesn't erase damage. I know that too. And I won't be the quiet, invisible wife anymore. If we do this, if we try to make this marriage real, I'll have opinions. I'll argue. I'll expect to be heard and respected and treated as an equal partner. Lyra? Adrian's hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I don't want quiet or invisible. I want you, the real you, the warrior who set a trap for a killer and walked into it with her eyes open, the woman who stood in a conservatory with a madwoman's hands around her throat and didn't break. That's who I want. That's who I'm asking to give me another chance. The words unlocked something in Lyra's chest, some final barrier she'd built to protect herself. Tears spilled over, surprising them both. I'm so tired of fighting alone, she whispered. Then don't. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her as she finally let herself break. I'm here. I'll fight beside you. Whatever comes next, we face it together. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, letting 7 years of loneliness and hurt finally drain away. When Lyra's tears subsided, Adrian helped her into bed, still fully dressed, completely chaste, but together in a way they'd never been. He settled in the chair beside the bed, keeping watch as she drifted into exhausted sleep. When Lyra woke, late afternoon sun was painting the room gold. Adrian was exactly where she'd left him, though he'd fallen asleep in the chair, his head tipped back, his face finally relaxed. She studied him in the gentle light, this man she'd married as a stranger and lived with as a ghost. He was handsome, yes. War and hardship had carved his features into something striking, but more than that, he was present. Finally, after 7 years, he was actually here. You're staring, Adrian said without opening his eyes. How did you know? I can feel it. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. How's your throat? Sore, but I'll survive. I seem to be good at that. The best I've ever seen. He stood, stretching cramped muscles. Are you hungry? Mrs. Pemberton has been preparing food all day. I think she's processing trauma through cooking. I could eat. They dined in Adrian's private sitting room, a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables that neither of them tasted much. The conversation came easier now, small talk and observations, building the kind of casual intimacy that should have developed over 7 years. Mother wants to see you, Adrian said. She sent 3 messages while you were sleeping. I think she wants to officially adopt you as her favorite person. I nearly got her killed. You saved her life by identifying the threat. There's a difference. Adrian topped up her wine. She told me what you said to her, about not abandoning what's yours, about this being your family. I meant it. I know. That's what made her cry. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Pemberton entered, her face troubled. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent. A Mr. J. Thorne?" Lyra's inquiry agent. She exchanged glances with Adrian. "Show him to the study. We'll receive him there." J. Thorne proved to be a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers and the darting eyes of someone who lived in shadows. He clutched a leather portfolio like a shield. "Your Grace, Your Graces, I should say." He bobbed his head at Adrian. "I came as soon as I heard about Lady Somerset's arrest. I thought you should see this immediately." He opened the portfolio, spreading documents across Adrian's desk. Financial records, letters, witness statements, months of investigation compiled into damning evidence. "Somerset's death wasn't her first," Thorne said. "I traced her back to before her marriage. Born Catherine Hayes, daughter of a failed merchant. 3 men courted her seriously. All 3 died within months of rejecting her advances. 1 in a coaching accident, 1 from food poisoning, 1 from a fall downstairs." "She's been killing for years," Lyra breathed. "At least a decade, possibly longer. She has a pattern. Identify wealthy targets, pursue them, eliminate them if they prove difficult, and move on to the next. Somerset was simply the first one she actually married." "And I was supposed to be next," Adrian said slowly, after she removed Lyra. "Almost certainly. Your wealth, your title, your political connections, you would have been her greatest prize." Thorne pulled out another document. "And this is perhaps most interesting. She's been in correspondence with someone. We don't have a name yet, but the letters suggest a partnership. Someone who helped her gain access to society events, who provided information about potential targets." "Someone here in London?" Lyra asked. "Yes. Someone with connections and resources. Someone who benefited from her activities, perhaps through blackmail, perhaps through shared profits from the inheritances." Adrian's face had gone white. "Are you saying there's another player? Someone still out there?" "I'm saying Lady Somerset didn't work alone. And while she's in custody, her partner is still free." The implications settled over them like frost. Catherine had been neutralized, but the danger wasn't finished. Somewhere in London's glittering society, someone else was watching, calculating, possibly planning their next move. "Find them," Adrian said to Thorne. "Whatever it costs, find them. I want names, evidence, everything you can dig up." "Yes, Your Grace. Though I should warn you, if they suspect I'm investigating, they may act, eliminate evidence, or witnesses." "Then move quickly and quietly." Adrian stood, his posture shifting into something military and commanding. "And report only to me or the Duchess. Trust no one else." After Thorne left, Adrian turned to Lyra. "This changes everything. We thought we were safe, but—" "We're not," Lyra finished. "Not yet. Catherine was the weapon, but someone else was the hand wielding her. Then we keep fighting." "Together," Lyra agreed. The word felt different now, not a concession or a compromise, but a promise. They were partners now, forged through fire and blood and shared survival. Whatever came next, they would face it as a unit. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, the Dowager Duchess. Eleanor arrived in a flurry of skirts and determination, looking remarkably recovered for a woman who'd been poisoned weeks earlier. "Out!" she commanded Adrian the moment she entered. "I need to speak with your wife, privately." Adrian looked to Lyra, who nodded. He left reluctantly, closing the door behind him. Eleanor settled onto the settee, studying Lyra with sharp eyes. "You saved my life," she said without preamble. "Twice. Once by identifying the poison, once by catching my poisoner." "I did what was necessary." "No, you did what was right, even though I've been absolutely beastly to you for 7 years." Eleanor's voice wavered, a crack in her usually impeccable composure. "I blamed you for Adrian's unhappiness. Convinced myself that if he'd married differently, chosen differently, he would have been content. But you weren't the problem. His inability to let go of the past was the problem, and I enabled it by sympathizing instead of forcing him to move forward. You were protecting your son. I was indulging his self-pity. There's a difference." Eleanor reached across the space between them, taking Lyra's hand. "I owe you an apology." A massive, inadequate, 7 years too late apology. You deserved better from this family, from me, and I'm sorry. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes again. Apparently, surviving assassination had made her emotions closer to the surface. I accept your apology, she said quietly, and I offer one of my own. I should have fought harder, demanded more. Instead, I made myself small and invisible, thinking that was survival. I enabled the distance as much as anyone. Then we both start over. Eleanor squeezed her hand. As family, real family, I would very much like to get to know my daughter-in-law properly. I'd like that too. They spent the next hour in genuine conversation, not social performance, but actual connection. Eleanor proved to be wickedly intelligent and surprisingly funny when she dropped her society mask. They discussed books and politics, estate management and London gossip, finding common ground in unexpected places. When Adrian returned, he found them laughing over Eleanor's scandalous story about a certain duchess and her footman. "What did I miss?" he asked warily. "Nothing you need to know," Eleanor said primly, though her eyes danced with mischief. "Some conversations are for women only. I'm afraid of what that means." "Good. A little fear keeps men humble." Eleanor stood, embracing Lyra warmly. "Take care of my son. And let him take care of you. You've both earned a chance at actual happiness." After she left, Adrian pulled Lyra into his arms. "She apologized to you, didn't she?" "How did you know?" "Because she looks happier than I've seen her in years. And you look surprised." "I am surprised. Your mother is formidable." "So are you. Perhaps that's why you're finally getting along." The next week brought a deluge of social invitations. Everyone wanted the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn at their events now. The quiet, overlooked couple had transformed into society's most fascinating pair. Lyra found herself celebrated as brave, clever, devoted, all the things she'd always been but no one had bothered to notice. "You're enjoying this," Adrian observed at yet another dinner party, watching her hold court among admirers. "I'm enjoying being seen," Lyra corrected. "There's a difference." "No, you're enjoying the power. Don't deny it. I can see it in your eyes. You've realized that the woman who caught a killer has more social capital than a dozen diamonds." He was right. Lyra had discovered that survival gave her authority, that her story gave her influence. Ladies sought her advice. Gentlemen treated her with respect. She was no longer invisible, and she was learning to wield visibility like a weapon. But the best moments were private ones. Nights in Adrian's chambers, their chambers now, as Lyra had officially moved her belongings, talking until dawn. Learning each other's patterns and preferences. Building intimacy slowly, carefully, with the kind of attention 7 years of neglect made precious. "Tell me something I don't know," Adrian said one night, both of them still fully clothed, lying on top of the covers, maintaining the careful chasteness of two people learning to trust. "I can play the pianoforte," Lyra said. "Quite well, actually. I practiced for hours when I first came to Blackthorn Manor, but you never asked, so I never played." "That's—" Adrian's face twisted with regret. "That's heartbreaking. Will you play for me now? Do you want me to?" "Very much." They went downstairs to the music room, a space Lyra hadn't entered in years. The pianoforte sat beneath a dustcloth, forgotten. Adrian helped her uncover it, and Lyra sat on the bench, her fingers finding the keys like greeting old friends. She played Beethoven, Mozart, and finally an improvisation of her own creation, something wild and melancholy that spoke of isolation and survival, of walls built and slowly dismantled. When she finished, Adrian was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're extraordinary," he said softly. "How did I live in the same house with you for 7 years and never know you at all?" "Because you never asked, because I never demanded, because we were both too afraid to try. I'm not afraid anymore. Neither am I." He pulled her to her feet, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or fierce, but tender. The kiss of two people choosing each other deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost and the prize. "I love you," Adrian whispered against her mouth. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe last week in the conservatory, Maybe months ago when I wasn't paying attention. Maybe it's been growing quietly for 7 years. But I love you, Lyra. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, but the actual, complicated, brilliant reality of you. Lyra's heart stumbled, caught between disbelief and desperate hope. You don't have to say it back, Adrian continued quickly. I know I haven't earned it yet. I just needed you to know, needed to say it out loud instead of keeping it locked away like everything else. Adrian. Lyra cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. I don't know if I love you yet. 7 years taught me to be cautious with my heart. But I know I could love you. I know I want to try. And I know that for the first time since our wedding day, I have hope that this marriage could be real. Then that's enough, Adrian said. Hope is enough to start with. They returned to their chambers hand in hand, and that night, for the first time, they slept in the same bed, wrapped around each other, choosing intimacy without obligation, building trust one careful moment at a time. The Ton noticed the change. How could they not? The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn had transformed from society's most tragic couple to its most devoted. They appeared everywhere together, spoke of each other with obvious admiration, touched with casual affection that suggested genuine partnership. They say adversity either destroys marriages or forges them stronger, Lady Ashworth commented at a musicale. The Blackthorns are proof of the latter. She certainly tamed him, Viscountess Grayson added. I've never seen Adrian so attentive. Or her so confident, another lady chimed in. She was always so quiet before. Now she's quite formidable. Lyra heard the whispers and smiled. Let them talk. Let them speculate. She knew the truth, that she hadn't tamed Adrian, but liberated him from his own past. And he had done the same for her, freeing her from invisibility and fear. 1 month after Catherine's arrest, they received word that she'd been tried and convicted. 3 murders proven, 2 more suspected, a pattern of predation that shocked even hardened magistrates. The sentence was death. It's finished, Adrian said when the message arrived. She's finished. But Lyra couldn't shake Thorne's warning about Catherine's mysterious partner. Someone else was still out there, still dangerous. The victory felt incomplete. Not finished, she corrected quietly. Just beginning. We won the battle, Adrian, but the war isn't over. Then we'll keep fighting. Together. Together, Lyra agreed, and this time the word felt like a vow, stronger than the ones they'd spoken 7 years ago, because these were chosen daily, earned through blood and fear and the slow, difficult work of learning to trust. The woman who had once been invisible stood at the window of Blackthorn House, watching London streets gleam in the rain, and she was no longer afraid. She was a duchess now, not in name alone, but in power, in purpose, in the kind of hard-won respect that came from surviving assassination and catching killers. And she was loved, actually genuinely loved by a husband who finally saw her. The frozen years were thawing, and what bloomed in their place was something neither of them had expected, but both desperately wanted. Hope. Partnership. The beginning of something real. The truth came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after Catherine's conviction, Sarah knocked on Lyra's door long past midnight, her face pale in the candlelight, a sealed envelope trembling in her hands. Your Grace, I'm so sorry to wake you, but this just arrived. The messenger said it was urgent, that it concerned your safety. Lyra took the envelope, her heart already accelerating. Beside her, Adrian stirred, immediately alert despite the late hour. 7 years of military training didn't fade easily. What is it? He asked, reaching for his robe. Lyra broke the seal. Inside was a single page in J. Thorne's cramped handwriting. The words rushed and urgent. Your Grace. I've identified Catherine Somerset's partner. The evidence is conclusive but dangerous. They know I'm close. Meet me at the Angel Inn, Southwark, tomorrow at noon. Come alone. Trust no one, not even... The sentence ended abruptly. The ink smeared as if the pen had been knocked from his hand. It's a trap, Adrian said immediately, reading over her shoulder. Obviously a trap. Or Thorne was interrupted while writing, and it's genuine. Either way, you're not going alone to Southwark. That's the most dangerous part of London. Which is exactly why whoever Catherine's partner is would choose it. Lyra reread the letter, analyzing every word. But you're right about the trap possibility. The question is, trap set by whom? Thorn compromised and forced to lure us? Or the partner using Thorn's name? Does it matter? We're not walking into it. We're absolutely walking into it. Lyra met his eyes steadily. But we're walking in prepared with backup and with a plan. Because if Thorn really has identified the partner, we need that information. And if this is a trap, we need to know who set it. Adrian's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping with suppressed frustration. I hate when you're logical about life-threatening situations. I learned from the best. She touched his face gently. From you. From watching you make tactical decisions even when they terrified you. The difference is I'm expendable. You're not. We're both essential to each other, to this family, to finishing what Catherine started. Lyra stood, moving to her writing desk. Now, let's plan this properly. We have until noon tomorrow. That gives us, she checked the mantle clock, 11 hours to prepare. They spent the pre-dawn hours strategizing like generals before battle. Adrian sent trusted men to scout the Angel Inn and surrounding area. Lyra compiled everything they knew about Catherine's associates, her finances, her correspondence, looking for the thread that would lead to her partner. Money, Lyra said suddenly, pointing to a ledger Thorn had provided weeks ago. Look at these payments. Monthly deposits to Catherine's account. Always the same amount. Always from an anonymous source. Someone was funding her. Paying her to remove obstacles? Adrian leaned closer. That's not a partner. That's an employer. Or a collaborator who benefited from the deaths. Who would gain from eliminating wealthy men? They stared at each other as understanding dawned simultaneously. An heir, Adrian breathed. Someone who inherited when Catherine's targets died. Or someone who purchased the estates and properties at reduced prices from desperate heirs. Lyra began rifling through papers with renewed urgency. Thorn documented Somerset's estate sale. Who bought it? Adrian found the document, his face going pale as he read the name. Lord Marcus Pemberton. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Lord Marcus Pemberton, Lady Ashworth's brother, a prominent financier, respected member of Parliament, host of the ball where Eleanor had been poisoned. He had access, Lyra said slowly, to the punch, to Catherine, to information about society families, and he's wealthy enough that no one would question sudden property acquisitions. But why? He's already rich, already powerful. Is he? Lyra grabbed another document, a financial report Thorn had compiled. Look at this. His bank is overextended, carrying enormous debt. He's been buying failing estates at bankruptcy prices, but he needs liquid capital to complete the purchases. Capital that comes from Catherine's victims' estates being sold quickly by heirs who needed immediate funds. Adrian's voice was hollow. He was creating the supply and the demand. Catherine killed the owners. Grief-stricken heirs sold at loss, and Pemberton bought cheap with money Catherine funneled to him. It's brilliant, Lyra admitted coldly. And monstrous. How many estates, Adrian? How many deaths? They counted. 7 properties over 10 years, 7 wealthy men dead, their estates absorbed into Pemberton's growing empire. And Catherine, moving through society like a beautiful plague, eliminating obstacles for profit. We need to get this to the magistrate, Adrian said. We need proof that will stand in court. Right now, this is all circumstantial, suspicious, but not conclusive. Lyra looked at the letter from Thorn again. That's why we go to Southwark. Either Thorn has the proof we need, or Pemberton reveals himself trying to eliminate us. I still hate this plan. I know, but it's the only one we have. They arrived at the Angel Inn precisely at noon, but not alone. Adrian's most trusted men were positioned throughout Southwark, on rooftops, in alleyways, disguised as dock workers and merchants. If Pemberton made a move, he'd find himself surrounded. The Angel Inn was exactly the kind of establishment Lyra had expected. Dark, cramped, smelling of stale beer and unwashed humanity. The innkeeper, a burly man with suspicious eyes, barely glanced at them when Adrian asked for Thorn. Upstairs, 3rd door on the left. He's been expecting you. They climbed the narrow stairs, Adrian's hand on the small of Lyra's back, the other resting on the pistol concealed beneath his coat. The 3rd door stood slightly ajar, darkness beyond. Mr. Thorn? Lyra called. No answer. Adrian pushed the door open carefully, and they both froze. Jay Thorne sat at a small table, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring at nothing. Dead. Recently, judging by the warmth still in the room. "Out!" Adrian commanded, pulling Lyra backward. "Now! It's a—" The door slammed shut. Behind them, Lord Marcus Pemberton emerged from the shadows where he'd been waiting, a pistol trained on Adrian's chest. "A trap, yes," Pemberton finished smoothly, "though not quite the kind you expected, I imagine." He was handsome in a bland, forgettable way, the kind of face that blended into crowds, that people struggled to recall. Perfect camouflage for a predator who'd operated in plain sight for a decade. "Lord Pemberton," Lyra said, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "How predictable. Did you really think we'd come alone? Did you really think I wouldn't plan for backup?" Pemberton's smile was cold. "Your men are currently being detained by mine. Quite outnumbered, I'm afraid. This part of London belongs to people who owe me favors. We won't be interrupted." "The magistrate knows we're here," Adrian said. "No, he doesn't. You're too smart to involve authorities before gathering proof. You came here hoping Thorne would provide that proof." Pemberton nudged the dead man's chair with his foot. "Unfortunately, Mr. Thorne proved less reliable than I'd hoped. Started asking the wrong questions, making uncomfortable connections. I had to accelerate my timeline." "Your timeline for what?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. "For removing you both, of course. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, tragic victims of a robbery gone wrong in dangerous Southwark. Your bodies found in this squalid inn, your valuables stolen, no witnesses. Society will mourn, your estates will pass to distant relatives who will sell quickly, and I'll be first in line to purchase, grief-stricken and generous with my offers." "You're insane," Adrian said flatly. "I'm practical. Catherine was supposed to remove you quietly, seduce you, marry you after arranging Lyra's tragic accident, then poison you at leisure. Instead, she became obsessed, careless. She forced my hand." Pemberton's gun didn't waver. "But this works too. Messier, but effective." "Except you've confessed everything to witnesses," Lyra pointed out. "2 witnesses who'll be dead in moments? That's not concerning." "3 witnesses, actually." The new voice came from the window. Eleanor Blackthorne sat on the ledge outside, having climbed from the neighboring building with remarkable agility for a woman her age. In her hands was a pistol of her own, aimed squarely at Pemberton's head. "Hello, Marcus," she said pleasantly. "You always were a tedious little man. Drop your weapon before I redecorate this dismal room with your brains." Pemberton spun, startled, and Adrian moved. He slammed into Pemberton from the side, driving him into the wall. The pistol fired, the shot going wild, shattering the window behind Eleanor. She didn't flinch. The 2 men struggled, crashing into furniture. Lyra grabbed a heavy candlestick from the table and brought it down on Pemberton's wrist. He screamed, the pistol falling from nerveless fingers. "Enough," Eleanor commanded, her weapon now pressed to Pemberton's temple. "Be still, or I'll save the hangman some work." Adrian yanked Pemberton's arms behind his back, securing them with the rope that had apparently bound Thorne before his death. Within moments, the magistrate's men arrived. Not detained as Pemberton had claimed, but strategically delayed until Eleanor could get into position. "You lied," Pemberton spat at Lyra. "About coming alone." "I learned from the best," Lyra said. "From you, from Catherine, from everyone who underestimated me and paid the price." They hauled Pemberton away, still screaming threats and accusations. The magistrate himself, a stern man named Crawford, surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. "This is enough," he said, examining Thorne's body and the evidence scattered around the room. "Combined with the financial documents you've already provided, this will see Pemberton hang beside Lady Somerset." 7 murders, Adrian said quietly. "At least 7 that we know of. Likely more. We'll investigate his entire property portfolio, cross-reference with suspicious deaths." Crawford's expression was troubled. "I apologize, Your Graces, that someone of Pemberton's standing could operate so brazenly under our noses." "He relied on society's blindness," Lyra interrupted, "on the assumption that titled lords don't murder for money, that beautiful ladies don't poison for profit. He weaponized our prejudices against us. Well, he won't anymore. Crawford tipped his hat. You've done the crown a great service, both of you. England is safer with predators like Catherine Somerset and Marcus Pemberton in chains. After he left, the three of them stood in the dingy room, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. You climbed a building, Adrian said to his mother. At your age, in your condition, at my age, I'll climb whatever I please, Eleanor retorted. Besides, someone needed to provide insurance. You two are brave but occasionally reckless. Thank you, Lyra said simply, for trusting me enough to follow the plan. Eleanor crossed to her, taking both of Lyra's hand in her own. My dear girl, I'd follow you into hell itself at this point. You've proven yourself 10 times over. The question is, are you all right? The concern in her voice, the genuine care, nearly undid Lyra's composure entirely. She'd spent 7 years starving for this kind of regard from Adrian's family. I'm all right, she managed. Better than all right. I'm free. They returned to Blackthorn House to find it transformed into something close to celebration. Word had spread quickly about Pemberton's arrest, about the full scope of the conspiracy being revealed. Servants who'd served the family for decades were openly jubilant that the danger had finally passed. Mrs. Pemberton approached Lyra in the entrance hall, her eyes bright with tears. You saved us all, Your Grace. Not just His Grace and the Dowager, but all of us who live and work here. We knew something was wrong these past months. We felt it. But you fixed it. You made us safe. We made us safe, Lyra corrected gently. Everyone who stood together, who refused to give in to fear. But Mrs. Pemberton was already curtsying, already spreading word through the household that their Duchess was not only brave, but humble. Not only clever, but kind. Adrian found Lyra later in the music room playing the pianoforte, the wild, melancholy improvisation she'd created weeks ago, but transformed now. Still complex, still haunting, but no longer quite so lonely. It sounds different, he observed, settling beside her on the bench. I feel different. The isolation is gone. The fear is gone. Her hand stilled on the keys. I spent 7 years surviving, Adrian. Now I can finally start living. With me? He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I know I have no right to ask after everything. Stop. Lyra turned to face him fully. Stop apologizing for the past. We can't change it. We can only choose what comes next. Then I choose you. Every day, every moment, for the rest of my life. I choose you, Lyra. And I choose you. The words came easier than she'd expected, carrying the weight of truth she'd been afraid to speak. I think I've been choosing you for weeks now, in small ways. Choosing to fight for our marriage instead of fleeing it. Choosing to trust instead of protecting myself. Choosing to hope. Do you love me? Adrian asked, his voice vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. You don't have to say yes. I'll understand if... I love you, Lyra interrupted, and felt the truth of it resonate through her entire body. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you pulled Catherine off me in the conservatory. Maybe when you held me while I cried. Maybe it grew slowly over 7 years of proximity, waiting for the moment we'd both be ready to notice. But yes, Adrian, I love you. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and for the first time there was no desperation or fear beneath it, only joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lyra smiled against his mouth. Take me to bed, she said. Our bed. Really, truly ours. No more separate rooms, no more careful distance. I want to be your wife in every possible way. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. They made love that night for the first time in their 7-year marriage, and it was nothing like the dutiful consummation Lyra had once imagined. It was passionate and tender, fierce and gentle, two people choosing intimacy with full knowledge and full hearts. Afterward, wrapped in Adrian's arms, Lyra felt something fundamental shift into place. She was no longer the invisible Duchess, the overlooked wife, the woman surviving in the margins of her own life. She was Lyra Blackthorn, in truth, in power, in love. The scandal surrounding Pemberton's arrest consumed London for months. The full scope of his crimes emerged during the trial. 9 murders proven, 12 more suspected, a network of corruption that reached into banking, parliament, and society's highest circles. Catherine Somerset, already convicted, provided testimony in exchange for a marginally less brutal imprisonment. She named accomplices, revealed methods, destroyed reputations with the same casualness she'd once destroyed lives. The trial was a sensation. Lyra and Adrian attended every day, sitting in the gallery, presenting a united front. Society watched them avidly. The Duke and Duchess, who'd caught 2 killers, who'd transformed from tragedy to triumph. "They're calling you the Ice Duchess," Eleanor reported one morning over breakfast, reading from the scandal sheets, "for your composure during testimony. Apparently you stared down Pemberton's barrister without flinching when he tried to suggest you'd invented evidence." "I don't appreciate the nickname," Lyra said. "I think it's rather fitting," Adrian disagreed, "though I'd modify it. Not ice that's cold and brittle, ice that's strong and enduring, ice that's beautiful and deadly when needed." "That's quite poetic for a military man. You bring out unexpected qualities in me." Eleanor made a gagging sound. "You two are disgustingly in love. It's wonderful. I'm thrilled and also somewhat nauseated." They laughed. This family that had been fractured and was now whole. Eleanor had moved into Blackthorn House permanently, claiming she wanted to be close to her son and daughter-in-law. But Lyra suspected the real reason was loneliness. Eleanor had spent years maintaining perfect society appearances while desperately missing genuine connection. Now she had it. They all did. The verdict came down in late autumn as London prepared for the winter season. Pemberton was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to hang. Catherine Somerset would spend the rest of her life in prison, her beauty and charm irrelevant behind stone walls. "It's finished," Adrian said as they left the courthouse for the final time. "Finally, completely finished." "No." Lyra took his hand, pulling him close as photographers captured their image. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, triumphant. "It's not finished. It's beginning. Our real life, the one we choose instead of the one we were forced into." That winter, Lyra discovered she was pregnant. The physician confirmed it on a gray December morning, and Lyra sat in stunned silence, processing the information. A child. After 7 years of emptiness, of Eleanor's pointed comments about heirs, of her own secret grief every month that proved their marriage remained unconsummated, now, finally, a child. She told Adrian that evening, watching his face cycle through shock, joy, fear, and wonder in rapid succession. "A baby," he breathed, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. Terrified, maybe. Overwhelmed, definitely. But happy above all else. Good. Because I'm all of those things too. Eleanor, when told, actually wept. Great heaving sobs that she tried unsuccessfully to hide behind her handkerchief. "I thought I'd never see this," she managed through tears. "A grandchild from a marriage I believed was dead. You've given me everything, Lyra, everything I'd given up hoping for." The pregnancy transformed Lyra's social standing completely. She'd already been celebrated as brave and clever. Now she was elevated to something approaching reverence. The Duchess who'd caught killers and was now producing the next generation of Blackthorns. Society couldn't get enough. "They're writing poems about you," Adrian reported one morning, reading from yet another newspaper. "Terrible poems, but still. Listen to this. The Duchess bold, with heart of gold, who caught the killers in her hold." "Please stop," Lyra begged, laughing. "That's dreadful." "I think it's charming." "You're biased." "Absolutely. Hopelessly, completely biased." As her pregnancy progressed, Lyra found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. 7 years ago, she'd stood in St. George's Chapel beside a stranger, making vows that felt hollow. She'd survived those years through strategic invisibility, making herself small to avoid pain. But invisibility was survival, not life. Real life had required risk, confronting Adrian, setting the trap for Catherine, refusing to retreat when danger came calling. Real life had required choosing courage over safety, partnership over solitude, hope over resignation. And now real life meant preparing to bring a child into a family that had been broken and rebuilt stronger. The baby arrived on a warm May evening as spring flowers bloomed throughout Blackthorn Manor's gardens. Lyra endured 14 hours of labor with the same strategic composure she'd brought to catching killers, analyzing each contraction, managing her breathing, refusing to panic even when the pain became overwhelming. "You're remarkable," the midwife said, as Lyra bore down for the final push. "Most first-time mothers scream the house down. You're quiet as a battlefield commander." "I've survived worse than this," Lyra managed between contractions. "This pain has a purpose." When her daughter emerged, healthy, furious, screaming her displeasure at the world, Lyra felt something fundamental complete itself inside her chest. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not just survival, not just her own life, but this. The ability to bring new life into a world she'd made safer, into a family she'd made whole. "A girl," the midwife announced, placing the baby on Lyra's chest. "Perfect in every way." Adrian, who'd been pacing outside per tradition, burst through the door the moment he heard crying. He froze at the threshold, staring at Lyra and their daughter with an expression of such profound awe that it made Lyra's heart ache. "Come meet your daughter," Lyra said softly. He approached slowly, as if walking through a dream. When he looked down at the tiny red-faced infant, his composure finally cracked completely. "She's perfect," he whispered. "You're both perfect." "She needs a name." They'd discussed this for months, debating family names and honoring ancestors. But looking at her daughter now, this fierce little creature who'd announced her arrival with such indignant fury, Lyra knew there was only one name that fit. "Victoria," she said, "for victory, because that's what she represents, victory over loneliness, over fear, over everything that tried to destroy us." "Victoria Eleanor Blackthorn," Adrian added, honoring his mother. "Is that acceptable?" "It's perfect." Eleanor, aloud and moments later, took one look at her granddaughter and dissolved into tears again. "She looks like you," she told Lyra. "The same determined chin, the same intelligent eyes. The world should prepare itself." "Heaven help us if she inherited her mother's strategic mind and her father's stubbornness," Adrian said. But his tone was pure pride. Victoria Eleanor Blackthorn was christened 6 weeks later in St. George's Chapel, the same church where Lyra and Adrian had married 7 years earlier. But everything else was different now. The woman who'd walked down that aisle alone and afraid was gone, replaced by someone stronger, surer, loved. The ceremony drew enormous crowds. Society wanted to see the Ice Duchess's child, wanted to celebrate the happy ending to a story that had seemed destined for tragedy. Standing at the font, holding her daughter while Adrian stood beside her with his hand on her back, Lyra looked out at the assembled crowd and realized something profound. She'd won. Not through silence or submission, not through making herself small or acceptable. She'd won by refusing to be broken, by fighting when fighting seemed impossible, by choosing courage repeatedly, even when courage terrified her. She'd transformed from invisible to unforgettable, from victim to victor, from the forgotten wife to the celebrated duchess. And she'd done it without losing herself. In fact, she'd found herself in the process. That evening, back at Blackthorn Manor, the family gathered in the nursery. Victoria slept peacefully in her cradle, oblivious to the revolution she represented. Eleanor sat by the window, embroidering a blanket for her granddaughter. Adrian stood beside Lyra, both of them watching their daughter with expressions of wonder. "Do you remember our wedding night?" Adrian asked quietly. "Vividly. You couldn't wait to escape to your separate chambers. I was a coward and a fool. You were a man in pain who didn't know how to heal." Lyra leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her automatically. "But you learned. We both did. If I could go back, I wouldn't want you to." Lyra turned to face him fully. "If you could go back and change things, we might not have ended up here. We might have built something comfortable but shallow. Instead, we have something earned, something real. Through fire and blood, through survival and choice." Lyra looked at their daughter, their family, the life they'd built from ruins. "I wouldn't change a single moment, Adrian. Not the pain, not the loneliness, not the danger. because it all led here, to this, to us. Outside, the Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful and unforgiving. But inside Blackthorn Manor, warmth bloomed. In the nursery where Victoria slept, in the drawing room where Eleanor hummed while she worked, in the hearts of two people who'd learned that the coldest winters could give way to the most glorious springs. The woman they'd called the Ice Duchess stood at the window with her husband's arms around her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, and she was no longer ice at all. She was fire, she was strength, she was love made tangible through years of fighting for it. She was Lyra Blackthorn, 7th Duchess of Blackthorn, and she had conquered not through submission, but through refusing to surrender. The frozen years were over. The real life, messy, beautiful, hard-won, had finally begun. And it was glorious. Years later, when Victoria was old enough to ask about her parents' story, Lyra would tell her the truth, about the cold marriage and the colder husband, about 7 years of survival in a house that felt like a prison, about the woman who'd tried to kill them all, and the courage it took to fight back. But she'd also tell her daughter about transformation, about how the weakest-seeming people could be the strongest, about how survival wasn't passive but active, a choice made daily, hourly, in moments when giving up seemed easier. "You were invisible?" Victoria would ask, eyes wide. "I made myself invisible," Lyra would correct, "to survive. But surviving isn't living, darling. Eventually, you have to choose to be seen, even when being seen is dangerous." "Were you scared?" "Terrified. But I chose courage anyway, and that's the secret. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's fear that you've decided won't control you." Victoria would grow up hearing this story, learning from her mother's example. She'd grow into a woman who never made herself small, who never apologized for taking up space, who faced the world with the kind of fierce grace that came from being raised by a warrior disguised as a duchess. But that was years away. For now, on this perfect May evening, Lyra simply stood in her daughter's nursery with her husband's arms around her and let herself feel the full weight of her victory. She'd survived 7 years in ice, she'd earned her fire, and she would never, ever be cold again.